Looms, the key battleground will be over how to get the UK's public finances back on track. But it's a question that's now not only dividing politicians, also the economists. Today, 60 leading economists have come out in support of Labour's plan to delay cuts until 2011. However, last weekend, 20 others backed the Conservatives' call for cuts a lot sooner. Here's our chief economics correspondent, Hugh Pym.
It's the big question for whoever wins the election. Cut spending now or put it off till later. And it was the dominant issue today.
The first priority must be robust growth. And I say to the British people, this is not the time to put the recovery at risk. This is the time to make sure that growth and jobs are secured.
People at home know that when you've got a debt problem, you've got to get on and deal with it. And that is the key to the recovery. We've got to keep the interest rates down, we've got to get the confidence back in the British economy, and showing you can deal with your debts is an essential part of that.
These are familiar political arguments. What's new is that there are rival groups of economists who've entered the fray on different sides of the debate. They have conflicting sets of advice for whoever's going to be running the Treasury after the election. One lot sent a letter to the Sunday Times calling for more radical action on the deficit. The other hit back with letters to the Financial Times saying cuts too soon would harm the economy. In other words, different sides of the same political coin.
What we need to do is not just take more money out of people's pockets in taxes to pay for that, but we need to cut spending. So we said that you need a credible plan for doing that, and that plan needs to start now.
The government has got to keep spending in order to stop unemployment from rising. And we shouldn't see government cuts until we've seen the recovery well underway and unemployment on its way down.
All this will sound familiar to Geoffrey Howe, Conservative Chancellor in 1981. Then he planned to tighten his budget even as the economy was coming out of recession. And this was the reaction. A letter to the Times from 364 economists arguing he was doing the wrong thing. The eminent list of academics included Professor King, now Governor of the Bank of England. History proved Geoffrey Howe to be more right than they were. Cut now or cut later. Politicians, not economists, will have to make that decision, and it'll have a crucial bearing on how the economy performs over the next few years. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Well, another key issue ahead of the election is how best to provide care for the elderly in England, something that was discussed today at a conference attended by the government, the Liberal Democrats and a number of charities. The Conservatives, though, refused to take part, calling it a political ploy. They oppose the so-called death tax, one of the proposals under discussion. Here's our political correspondent in Watson.
For centuries, death and tax have been the two great certainties. But in this century, the great uncertainty is how to pay for the help that an increasingly ageing population need. While pensioners were enjoying a free lunch at this West London day centre, at Westminster, the Health Secretary was putting forward a menu of options to pay for a better system of social care in England. A compulsory insurance scheme, with the option of paying for this from your estate after death, or voluntary insurance, or a partnership scheme where you make a contribution to the cost of care from your own income or savings. Many of the charities which attended the government's hastily arranged social care summit said they favoured some form of compulsory scheme. But after 4 hours of talks, the Health Secretary still couldn't make his own mind up.
The government hasn't yet made a judgment about which is the right way to reform the system, and those discussions continue within government as we work towards a white paper.
The Conservatives stayed out of today's summit, refusing to go unless the government dropped the idea of a compulsory insurance scheme, which they've labelled a death tax.
I've been very clear that we want to build a partnership between government and families, each making a contribution to care and giving families an opportunity to meet that cost through a voluntary insurance.
The Lib Dems did turn up today. They want a cross-party commission to try to overcome political differences.
People out there in the country, particularly those who are trying to care for people at home, seeing their money disappearing, they're crying out for the politicians to be prepared to work together.
At various levels, the debate over funding social care has descended into a cantankerous argument over costs. There are the party political divisions, of course. But even within the Cabinet, some have got very little appetite for setting out the full costs of better care this side of a general election. But people here are very clear about who they think should pay.
We pay our taxes through our working life, so it's the responsibility of the government that's in power to look after the pensioners.
But politicians are still not rushing to tell us exactly how much better care in England will cost. Ian Watson, BBC News, West London.
A 9-year-old boy has been stabbed to death following an attack at his family home.